Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, Managing and Maximizing Agency Data, sponsored by Cellebrite on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are John Wilbur, the resident agent in charge of Computer Forensic Laboratory at the NASA Office of Inspector General, Zach Terwilliger, the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, Scott Perry, the special agent in charge of the Cyber Investigations and Technical Operations Division at the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General, and Lou Kios, the executive customer advisor at Cellebrite. We're talking about a lot of what we've been talking about is this idea of understanding the ability of what the data is, where it lives, how to share it, what steps are to share it, and then the kind of the tools that help you make sense of all this data. And let me turn to Scott, because one of the things here, you can have the best tools. I can give you the most shiny widget, but if you don't know how to use it, it doesn't really matter. So give me a sense, how are you guys at VA, Office of Inspector General, addressing the workforce training issue to make sure that they understand both the tools and how the data, and to make them both valuable?
Thank you, Jason. It is a challenge. First of all, you have to recruit people that can do the job, especially in federal law enforcement. We're recruiting sworn agents, so they have to have this certain basic training and experience as an investigator, and then to bring them on as an examiner is a challenge. And once you get them there, you have to use a myriad of tools. This tool may carve a file by the signature, and this may carve it by the header information. So it's keeping all that together and then up to the industry standards of 40 hours a year or 60 hours a year. It is difficult because you may not use a tool for a little while. It could be you're doing a fraud investigation and all of a sudden you have a bunch of mobile devices and you have to figure out how to look at a new operating system. So it's definitely a challenge. Especially with COVID-19, where a lot of the training's been canceled in person, we've had to switch to online training. And thankfully, a lot of the forensic and software vendors have that ability to provide that online training. And it's a challenge, but it's something we can overcome. Thankfully, I've had a really supportive management and agency where they've given us the budget to go to the training. But a lot of the forensic training is expensive, and it's hard to justify that year after year. Hey, you just had this last year. Why do you have to send this guy again? Well, it's totally different operating system now. It has new security features, and we have to be able to dig the data out to give it to the U.S. Attorney's Office.
How much of this is just in time? Meaning, hey, we have this investigation. We just found this new operating system. Okay, I can take a half hour, an hour out of my day and do a quick refresher. Exist, or is that not logical in the law enforcement world? Because that's an hour you could be spent doing an investigation analysis.
It really depends. Great example, 2 years ago, identity theft case, there was a phone model. I couldn't unlock the PIN, but I went to a training, got a tool, and the training literally unlocked it the next week and got all the PII that we use at trial. And we're going to bring a trial, and the suspect ended up pleading out. So it was a perfect example of, I got the training, I got the tool, I know how to use it, and I have the evidence.
There's other cases where that may not work, where
Correct.
The training doesn't help or you don't have time for it. It's a tricky thing, because keeping people up to date is always the biggest challenge, because listen, all our skill sets get stale sometimes.
And the other piece I want to touch on that was, a good example is John and I, we know each other through mutual acquaintances, partner agencies, and I have no problem if I run into an issue is reaching out to the greater community of federal law enforcement, be it vendors, people like John and other agencies, or even email distro lists where I can ask a general question. Hey, does anybody know how to get into this make and model of phone? And there's pretty good turnaround time. It's a very supportive community, and I may not have that training at hand to solve the problem or one of my examiners, but I can ask the question and usually get some pretty good feedback right away.
Zach, let me bring you back into the conversation, because one of the things that I imagine you deal with quite often is you're hiring attorneys. You at the U.S. Attorney's Office, you're bringing in people who went to law school. They're not necessarily having a heavy background in technology, and in some cases they probably made the choice to go into law versus technology. How are you guys dealing with the training issue, and then are you looking to hire certain types of people who maybe have that background too?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we hire attorneys, we're a full service shop. So in addition to attorneys, we have paralegals, we have litigation support, we have IT. When we hire attorneys, a lot of it used to depend on the type of case that you worked. If you were working violent crime, you may have to deal with technology to a lesser extent. Now it's everywhere. No matter what the violation is, you're going to have forensics involved. You're going to have technology involved. So it's caused us to move and adapt. And like an aircraft carrier, it can take us a little while to turn. And some people are more adept at it than others. Now, I will say, to your point, there are certain violations. Like, for example, if you work child exploitation images and you are, almost always going to be relying on forensics to prove your case regarding images on a computer, and you're dealing with things like the cache of a computer and deleted images and metadata, or we have a dedicated cyber unit, and you're dealing with foreign influence actors who engage in hacking. You do have to have an understanding of the apparatus. You have to be able to understand the tech speak so that you can prove your case. And you have to be able to understand it at a level that not only you understand it, but you then can explain it to a jury, a judge, a magistrate judge to get a warrant. So, look, I think I'm not going to fall into the trap of saying it's our older attorneys who don't understand technology, because that's not true. Some people can be, straight out of college and be Luddites because they were reading Shakespeare when the rest of us were on TikTok. But my point is, we have some folks who resist the technology and others who embrace it, and then some who kind of fall somewhere in the middle. And it is something we look at. And it's something that, we do when we list our criteria now. It used to be, are you proficient with WordPerfect or Microsoft Word? Now there's more proficiencies that are required, and there are trainings. But what we try and do is make it as user-friendly as possible when we get those new tools. And frankly, a lot of the technology for us is being used by our investigative partners. And then later on, we learn about it and have to explain it, with the one exception, which is dealing with these massive databases, whether it's Eclipse or Relativity or one of these vendors that helps us organize the data that's in our case files.
Zach, you brought me back. WordPerfect. Those are the no better example of a word processing than WordPerfect 5.1. But that's a conversation for a different time, I know. Lou, come into the conversation a little bit and talk about how Cellebrite kind of addresses this workforce issue, because it's very easy for me to buy a tool and never use it, or never use it to its full ability. And in fact, I hear that quite often from a lot of vendors who say, well, they bought the tool, but they weren't interested, or they only use 10% of its capabilities. How do you guys kind of ensure that people like Zach and John and Scott are using in 90% of the tool's capabilities?
Yeah. One of the big challenges I see in federal level also is, and as well as state and local law enforcement, is you have people that do the musical chairs. They're in a particular chair for a period of time. They take that knowledge training and they move on to something else. You've got a new person there, and the training isn't, let's say, automatic. It's not a yearly scheduled or scheduled annually for that particular position. The individual got took the initiative and got the training and then moved on. I think this is where the private sector and our partners, our federal, state, and local law enforcement partners, really can work better together. Because what we've seen at Cellebrite is when you develop that relationship, you don't look at us as Cellebrite as a vendor. We don't look at you just as a customer, but really partners in protecting our great country and making sure you have the tools, not only the tools, but the training. And you're absolutely right, Jason. We go into agencies and here's a scenario. I'll have a former colleague that'll call me and say, hey, Louis, we can't do this. And then I'll call back and we'll find out, yeah, they have that equipment. I'll call them and say, you have the equipment. You don't need to buy anything else. You have it. Well, where's it? And then we'll go in. What are the things that we do? And I think it's one of the good things that Cellebrite, amongst all the good things they do, is they do a digital intelligence workshop. And I've been a part of that, where we go into an agency, we sit down with the different investigative elements, and then we meet with the senior staff. And you'd be surprised how many of them didn't know that people aren't either sharing information, they had technology that they're not using, that they don't have an annual training procedure in place. And what we basically do is very nicely say, here are your gaps. If you fill these gaps, everybody would be connected. And you'd really be surprised to look on a police chief or a director or a superintendent's face when you have one of their investigators up and say, we don't ever share anything with the human trafficking unit because they're in a silo. So I think this is that part where we could really work together. And what it allows us to do on the private sector side is to make sure not only do we develop our technology to meet your needs, but also stay ahead in the training and those type of things to make sure that the people that are actually using them day to day are up to speed, have the training, have the knowledge to effectively and efficiently use the tools.
I think sometimes it just takes that extra effort to explain, no, you have that capability, here's how to use it. And I think that sometimes ends up being a challenge for everyone because it's I'm busy, I don't have time. John, jump in here too about NASA. You guys are full of scientists and really smart people, but that doesn't mean they all know how to use the technology and tools that you give them. So how are you guys dealing with training?
Yeah, it's a great point. We do have lots of smart people. The problem is the people that we are our customers and they want to look at this data aren't necessarily, again, computer experts. We do a lot of training at the different sites, at the different centers, at Kennedy Space Center, at the Johnson Space Center, with the general NASA public to educate them, and with our own OIG agents, the fraud agents, the procurement fraud agents. Here's the data we're getting. Here's how to interpret that data. Here's what you're looking at when you're in the review platform. So we do a lot of in-house training. I've unfortunately been in agencies where they'll buy a tool, but they won't buy the training. They're like, we just spent $20,000 on this tool. We have no money for training. And like Lou and Scott had said, if you have the tool and you're only using at 10% capacity, you're not really optimizing what that tool can do. We do the best we can. Again, we meet all the requirements the SIGI requires for the OIGs regarding digital forensics. But there are so many tools, and we try to pick 2-3 good courses, and we try to make sure everybody gets to them every year, and then kind of like train the trainer. Those people will come back and teach the rest of the office, and we do some outreach with the field.
Lou, one of the things that we've talked about here is making the data actionable, turning it from data to information or information to data to actionable intelligence. There's a lot of benefits of doing that. Quickly give me a sense of what are some of those benefits that our panelists and others in the federal community really should keep in mind as they're kind of making their decisions about how best to use their data, how to make sure it's valuable.
I think the main thing what it does is if you use the data correctly, it creates a clear picture of what really the challenge you have. You have an event that goes off, and at the moment it seems like it's a major event. But if you have quality technology there, digital, and like I said, the intelligence is timely, reliable, and actionable, and you look at it, now from my position, being a former government senior official, I've got to make decisions. How do I allocate resources? Who do I start notifying? What red bells do I start raising here? So I think those are all major issues, especially for the gentlemen that are on this panel at senior levels. They've got to make some hard decisions when bad things happen, or we think they're bad things. It may not be a bad thing. It may be a particular incident, and we have the resources on the ground right there to take care of it. But again, you're going to get that phone call. And do you have the data to back up? And now what we're finding out is in today's environment, I'm sorry to say, is people say, well, I don't know what I have. Well, you got to have an answer. What do you have? And what I think it does, it allows you to, again, create that picture. What I think it also does, Jason, is that as an executive, it sends us a clear message to your staff, your people, that there's a very important to collaborate, to share this information, and be part of a bigger team, rather than let's hold on to this information and let's hopefully that eventually it's not that one piece that helped to solve the case or bring a bad guy to justice.
All right, very good points there. I think it's important to not make a mountain of a molehill. I always say that when it comes to stories as well. Let's figure out what we got before we send out the news alert. Unfortunately, gentlemen, this has been a great conversation, but unfortunately we're just out of time. So first, let me thank my guests. John Wilbur, the resident agent in charge of Computer Forensic Laboratory at the NASA Office of Inspector General. Zach Terwilliger, the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. Scott Perry, the Special Agent in charge of Cyber Investigations and Technical Operations Division at the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General. And Lou Kios, the Executive Customer Advisor at Cellebrite. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the panel discussion, Managing and Maximizing Agency Data, sponsored by Cellebrite on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Cellebrite.